Welcome to this In Conversation with Corinna May. Corinna led a workshop for Theatre du Pif in November. In December, we invited her to lead, in fact, two workshops. The first one was an introductory workshop on voice. Corinna's a voice teacher who teaches a method called the Linklater method, freeing the natural voice, and she's also a Feldenkrais practitioner. So in the workshop, she brought these two practices together to work with a group of, well, in the introduction workshop, it was a group of actors and non-actors. It was quite a big group. There was 16 people on that. And then she also did a more advanced workshop where she was working with 8 performers. The workshops involve group work, together collective work, and they also involve solo work where the actors memorized a piece of text by heart, and then Corinna would work on that text with them. So in this conversation that I had with Corinna, she's going to talk about the work that we did in the workshop, and she's going to talk a bit more about the Linklater method, the Feldenkrais work, and really just the importance of our voice for performers and for good health. She's got some really interesting examples and recollections from her own working life. So I hope whether you're a performer or a non-performer, you'll find the conversation that we had interesting. So yeah, and Merry Christmas to all of you when it comes. Have a great Christmas and a good holiday season. Okay, so to begin with, I want to introduce a few months ago. I had a good friend of mine. He's the CEO of a trading company, and I do a bit of work with him. And he sent me this book. This book is called Introducing NLP, Neuro Linguistic, and I'd never heard of it before. And he said to me, "This will be interesting for you." And I said, "All right, okay." And it has this title underneath it. Later on, we'll edit in and we can show to the viewers. But it has a psychological skills for understanding and influencing people. But when I read it, it was kind of wonderful because it's basically about communication. And the first thing I wanted to share with you, there's this. He has this graph that the writers have this graph when they're talking about communication, and basically they say that there was a study done, and there's this. They say that 55% of what we communicate is through our body language, and that 38% is our vocal communication, and only 7% is actually the words or the speech that we've written or the presentation.
Yeah.
And I just know that, I mean, your work, your career in working with performers, but also with people who speak in public and who have to get up there. Have you found that to be the case? That when people are...
Yeah. Well, what I found, when you said that, it made me think about something that I say with my graduate students a lot, which is language is a pretty new invention. Like in terms of human evolution, language has not been around for that long. But communication has been around.
Yes.
For eons, right?
Yes.
But language is fairly new. So it stands to reason that we respond much more immediately to what I grew up calling the tone of voice, but we respond to what's in the voice.
Yes.
And much more immediately than we respond to the words. Now, that's not to take anything away from people who use the language beautifully, and playwrights and poets and writers, and how they can craft a sentence or a story in a way that it's really compelling. But it's the other thing I say to my actors is, well, why shouldn't somebody just stay home and read Hamlet? Why do they need to come hear it?
Yeah,
What
yeah.
is it that your voice is doing that there, or the same thing if I work with corporate clients or business clients, like what is it, why shouldn't this just be a memo?
Mm.
Like what is it that content is great, but content is not what persuades.
Yes.
Ultimately,
Yeah.
you can write very persuasive content, but the reason to do it out loud is because the voice is an instrument of engagement that goes, I think, connects into the most ancient parts of our
Yes. Yeah.
beings, you know? And the other thing is they say body language for communication, but I have to say, you know, the reason old time radio dramas were so effective is because there is a way in which we take information in through sound that I think is much more immediate and elemental and visceral than
Yeah.
what we take in through our eyes. So
It's
yes,
yeah.
I do agree that, that if I'm going like this and I say, wow, I'm so happy to see you, the body language belies the
Yeah.
words. But you could, you can watch a movie with the sound off, interesting. Then you can watch a movie and not look at it and just listen to it, and it will affect you on a very deep level.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
So,
No,
yeah.
I mean that really is it. Because I kind of I'd heard it somewhere before this, and there is always the thing about the body, and then there's the voice, and then there's the words. But no, it's really interesting what you say there about it's to bring in the voice in there. Well, it's not all the body isn't the big one, or we can maybe look at it, because I mean later on we're going to talk about, of course, the voice and the body that are together. It's funny, I'm a little bit bleary eyed this morning because I was listening to a big Scottish football match last night on the radio. I wasn't watching
Yeah.
it, and it just struck me there. It's so true because I usually watch the matches, and last night, because of rights reasons, I couldn't. So I listened to it, and it was fantastic. The vocal quality of it was a brilliant commentator, and he just painted the pictures of this
Yes.
match, and I
Yes,
was
they
so
do.
engaged.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know in baseball, they one of the announcers is called the color person, the color man,
Mm.
and that they're illustrating it, right?
Yeah.
They're giving you the picture. And of course, when you think about um in the early days of theater, uh they didn't have scenery
Yes.
and they didn't have electric lights, so they're performing under daylight without scenery. So the playwrights would write uh this storm, this weather is it's very cold, or it's very stormy, or I'm not, in Shakespeare, like in The Tempest, like here comes another big, huge storm. And the actors are creating all of this, and they have to give the audience the image
Yes.
of the sensory image, right? So the voice is or I don't know, people who say, well, the reason we started needing language because we had to say, look, I saw Good Hunting about 4 days walk, and I saw a whole herd of those things we kill for food,
Yeah.
and you know that more and more detail had to come. And it's really it's or I found this beautiful place, there's plenty of water, we're going to be able to live there. For some reason, we needed to be able to have um the specificity that language gives us,
Yes.
right?
That's
uh,
true.
and but I'm going to circle back to what you said about the body as well, because I think it's true when you look at people, especially when you look at little kids
The,
who have not started guarding themselves, that the body is quite eloquent, but a lot of people have gotten so good at guarding with the body
yeah. Yeah.
and guarding with the voice
Yeah.
that I think a lot of what gets these days, a lot of what gets communicated can be misinterpreted
Mm.
because, well, I'm actually, that's what I'm going to speak for my culture, because that's
Yeah,
what and I know there are other cultures that are certainly much more maybe physical than,
yeah,
and growing up in the United States. Um, but it's also, now I'm going to put these together because the voice comes from the body. It does make a difference what you do with the body.
yes.
And if the body is completely de-energized, it's difficult for the voice to be energized,
Mm.
right?
Yeah,
So when, for instance, people say, well, if you want to project confidence, stand in a confident way.
yeah,
And your audience will pick up that confident body language. But it's also true that standing in a confident way can make the person feel more confident, and then the voice will pick up that confidence.
uh, yeah.
Does that make sense?
It
So,
does. It does very much. And
so you can kind
yeah,
of go back and forth.
and I mean that it's great because the work that we did with you over the 3 weekends was really, you were really bringing this up, this connection with the body and how it's related to the voice. It's interesting you talked about, just when you were talking to Shakespeare there, and about the importance of the description. I remember Adrian Noble, who was the previous in conversation. I remember in our chat, he said in the old, in the Globe, or back in Shakespeare's day, people went to listen to the play.
Exactly.
They went to listen to it, and it was that, and it kind of struck me because we are so much a visual culture now, and so often the we don't listen so well for and
Exactly, exactly. People went you read the diaries of the people of the day, and they say, I went to hear a play, and it's called an audience, not
yeah,
I don't know the Latin for or Greek for what it would be if it was a
wonderful, yeah.
visual, but it's a listening. And uh and we are so visually oriented with, particularly with film and television and all that. Um, but and of course, in Shakespeare's time, the audience was participating. They
Yeah.
were giving their opinions, and they were right.
Yes.
There was a whole. It was a back and forth, but it's also, getting back to. So I'm sort of zigzagging around here, but getting back to language and the voice. I mean, another thing that, as actors, we learn to have a point of view, an intention, a need, right, to in order to play a scene, right,
Yeah.
and for it to be active, that drama needs to be, storytelling needs to be active. So, so your line could be, would you pass the salt? And depending on, there's a million ways to ask for the salt,
Yeah.
right? It could be, I really want to have a conversation with you, so would you pass the salt? It
Yeah.
could be, I want to have nothing to do with you, would you pass the salt? It could be that your food is bland, would you pass the salt?
Yeah. 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 Beautiful. Yeah.
You know
No. Yeah. I
so
mean, yeah. That's a great. I mean, that's a great example of what these guys are writing about in this.
yeah.
How we. Yeah. Just what you did there. There are so many ways to communicate one one line. I guess you could even take it down to one word. No.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And we I mean, actors are need to be cultivating this expressiveness and this energy and this imagination. And but I mean, I think every human being that I've ever worked with on the voice work finds that it's much more pleasurable to let themselves be expressive.
Yeah.
And then, and because I think there's a lot of, well, this is not a situation where I can be expressive, so I have to be very, you know,
Yeah.
sort of formal or I would say flat. Like I'm just not going to have too many highs or lows here, right? Um, but it's actually it's much more engaging when people allow their sort of their natural musicality to come out. And then once you've freed it up a bit, then you can decide, oh, this is a situation where I'm just going to be a little bit animated, or this is a situation where I'm going to let myself be completely animated. Uh, because we respond. I think that's why people are always so delighted when a child laughs.
Mm, mm. No,
You
that's
know,
yeah. I think in the one of the things that made a deep impression for me in the workshop was that, and it's kind of linked to just what you were saying there. This sense of connection, the connection that we have as in that workshop as participants in the room, and then that connection with you. And the other thing that was really impressive for me was the sense of empathy. And I can say, as a spending most of my life with my working life with performers in rehearsal rooms, people that are not involved in the theatre, my non-theatre friends, are always shocked to find that when I say no, actors are really vulnerable, and we have a lot of fear because they only see the opening night and they see they see the confident, and so for me, I really appreciated you, and I, I'm talking about this because I want you to give a little bit of an introduction, in a sense, to your career and your journey. Because what I found in the workshop with you was that because you have been an actor and a performer and a director, that when you were sharing with us and when you were working with us, that empathy that you had for us in the work. And I
mm,
think it's so crucial in teaching, certainly in directing. I think the best directors are the ones that have been actors themselves, and kind of can sense that vulnerability. So that's kind of a long way to say. Can you? Because I'm really in. I mean, that was one of the things that I would, because I know, your vocal work is the big part of your career, and that I'd like to just have a little introduction to how that came, as a
yeah,
performer, and when that area of like vocal work and these curiosities started
yeah.
to emerge for you.
Well, I did my I didn't set out to be like some people say, oh, I knew when I was 5 years old that I wanted to be an actor.
Yeah.
I did not know that I wanted to be an actor at 5. I grew up and in a family of historians. My grandfather was a historian. My father studied history, but went into ended up working for the State Department, and um, we were posted in Germany and Austria and then back to the States. So I spent part of my childhood in Frankfurt and part of it in Vienna. And then I was a great reader. And so I thought I was going to be a historian. I thought maybe a diplomat, I thought maybe I'd go into government service as well. And then I really fell in love with theater in high school. So I took some acting classes and I never got very far. But when I was in my last year of high school, I got cast in a couple of plays. And I really loved it. And I think what I loved was before that, I had been an athlete as well. And I loved being on a team. I was always in a team sport. And
Yeah.
I love the camaraderie. I love the community. I love the creating of something
Uh,
together. And I found that in theater, that storytelling in a group was really fun and exciting and something that took, that engaged my intellect and my feelings
yes.
and everything. I mean, I think that's one of the things people do love about acting is it calls on everything. So, but I still wasn't going to do it as a career. So I went to college and I had to take a class. I had my classes set up, philosophy, history, and they said, well, you have to take one more class. What else are you interested in? I said, oh, theater. And they said, okay, well, here's a lighting design class that fits your schedule. And I said, okay, fine. I don't know anything about lighting design. And there was a wonderful lighting designer. He was a Broadway lighting designer, but he'd always done teaching as well, because he said, well, it's a steady paycheck and you never know when the phone's going to stop ringing. He ended
Good
up being
advice.
successful. But then so I got involved in the theater, and then I started doing the acting classes, and I started auditioning, and I did a lot of backstage work, and then I started doing onstage work. And by the time I got to be my final year of college, I did the Scottish play.
Ah, okay.
And I was also taking my first voice class, a voice and speech class. And my teacher said, you have to practice every day, and I will know if you haven't. And we had class twice a week. And
Yeah.
if you came in, he could tell if you hadn't practiced every day.
Yeah.
And so I would go home every day after rehearsal. I would spend, half an hour, 45 minutes doing voice work and then going over my lines.
Mm.
And as a result, I had an experience as an actor that I'd never had before. Because it enabled me to access the story and to tell the story and to access myself.
Mm.
And I was playing Lady Macbeth, and I should have brought a picture to show you, but I just fell in love with it. And it's somewhere in another room.
Oh no, you
And
just send it to us. We'll edit it into the
I
video.
will, I'll send it to you. And so anyway, I said, okay, if I can do this, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
And then I spent a couple of years working, and then I went to acting school. And then but before I went to acting school, I did what they call summer stock, which is summer theater, right? It only exists in the summer.
Yeah.
And the summer theater I was doing, I was a non-union, and they had 5 union actors who also were teachers. So we would take classes in the morning, and then we'd rehearse in the afternoon, and then perform in the evening, and then we'd open one show and we'd start performing another one in the
Mhm.
afternoon. We ended up doing 3 shows.
Yeah.
But they were teaching us Feldenkrais and
Ah.
Linklater
Oh, so that was wow.
together.
Yeah.
They would teach us, they would give us Feldenkrais lessons on one day, and then they would give us Linklater the next day, or maybe they would do Feldenkrais and then Linklater, like an hour of each.
Yes.
Anyway, it was, at first I thought, what is this? This is so, I thought this is the stupidest stuff anybody's ever. And then about 3 weeks in, I had this huge experience where I guess my breath dropped in and I connected to myself, and my vulnerability showed up, what my defenses fell apart.
Yeah.
And I could also see immediately what it did for my acting. Everything became more truthful, more immediate, more connected. Um, and so and I was
That's
22.
oh
So that
wow.
was, several decades ago. And
But
then
early, I was very far. I mean, it was early in your
it
career.
was early, and it was, and I'm very grateful
Yeah.
because I ended up studying with it was 2 of the equity guest artists who were teaching this, and they said, go study with our teacher. So I spent 10 weeks studying in a group class with this teacher. Clyde Vinson was his name. And then I sort of went away from it, and then I went to acting school, and I had Linklater work in acting school, just one, like 1 year of it. Um, and then I ended up with a company called Shakespeare and Company in Lenox, Massachusetts, which Kristen Linklater herself was one of the 3 founding members of this company. And the point of this company was to Tina Packer and Kristen Linklater wanted to find and revitalize Shakespeare, and they felt that in England it had gotten, this was in the 70s and 80s, in the 80s, that it had gotten a bit heady.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, that people were really, they had all kinds of craft and technique, but they were really disconnected from their bodies.
Yeah.
And that in America, the actors were really connected to their bodies and their feelings, but they didn't have the skills, the
No.
voice and movement skills, because it had all gotten sort of internal with some of the people blame the method. The method has many, many, many different facets, and some of them are not are much more internal and so anyway, American, but they thought we can get this truthfulness that the Americans have and teach them this, get them voice,
Yeah.
give them voice and movement training and fight training and dance training and get their bodies alive and get back to that immediacy that we imagine the Elizabethans had when the language was 400 years younger than it is now
Yeah.
and the bodies were more alive and Queen Elizabeth was 14 galliards before breakfast or whatever it was for aerobic exercise. So they got a grant to do this. And then from the Ford Foundation, they did it for a year and then they started this company. And I ended up, and in order to work with this company, you had to participate in this month-long training workshop that they taught. That the public, which they still do, these month-long intensives. And I did the workshop and it was amazing. And I started working with a company. And what I understood when I started working with Shakespeare and Company, because training was one of the foundational, it's fundamental to the ethos of this company that everybody is training, that everybody's working on themselves as an actor, right? You don't just go to acting school and say, okay, that's done. I never have to train again, right? Which an athlete would never do, a
Yeah.
musician would never do, a dancer would never dream of not continuing to
Yeah.
work on themselves, right? So, and what I started to see was that my acting could just keep getting better
Yeah.
if I kept, because the classroom, the studio was a place to ask questions,
Questions. Yeah.
discover things, and then bring that work, go on stage, do the work again, so it's a sort of loop between the two. There's going in, there's working on your voice, then going on stage and playing a very demanding role and going, actually, my voice needs even more than that. Now I need to go work on this,
Yeah.
right? I need to work on having more range, or I need to work on more stamina, or then I go back into the classroom with that need. But um and then that's when I also thought, okay, well, maybe teaching is something I could do.
Mm.
I had stayed away from teaching for a long time because I gotta say I've been incredibly lucky and privileged. I have had some amazing teachers, and I always held them in such high respect, and I always thought I can't possibly live up to that. So I'm not even going to try. And then in fact, another thing at Shakespeare and Company was that so many members of the company were teachers as
Mm.
well as performers. So there were all these amazing people to study with. So, and there was Kristen Linklater, and I thought, well, why waste this opportunity? So I started studying, and it was, it was challenging.
Yeah.
It was really really challenging, but also uh
In what way? What was it? What was that? What when you say the child in working with her or what? What?
well, it's partly, I mean, Kristen was a taskmaster. She really was. But oh, just so gifted. Gifted as a teacher, gifted as an acting coach and director, like the way she could work with actors individually on their particularly Shakespeare. That's mostly what I saw her working on.
Mm.
But but her ability to see and hear and sense the person in front of her
Okay.
and what they particularly needed. So she never taught a method, she taught the human being. And
Yes.
that was one of the things she taught us. I remember a lesson she said to us at one point. So the training takes a minimum of 3 years with for the Linklater voice work. I took probably 10 from beginning to end
Hmm.
because I kept going off and acting. I wanted to, go do my acting career.
Yeah.
And and then I would, I mean, you have to, there's all kinds of things you have to do. You have to follow a master teacher while you have to follow them as they teach the progression. And that's a semester or two in college, in
Hmm.
wherever they're teaching. And then you have to have about 60 one-on-one sessions where they teach you the work, right? Where you work with a master teacher and you have about 60 hours of
Yeah.
one-on-one where they take you through the whole Linklater progression.
Mhm.
And
Oh,
then Kristen also thought if you're an actor, you need to go out and act because you need to know what it's like when you're coaching people.
yeah.
And now every Linklater teacher is not an actor, but she said if you're trained as an actor, don't stop acting.
Yeah.
You need to understand what it is you're acting, asking.
Yeah.
You need to understand what you're asking. And then at the end of our training, there would be a cohort of people who would then go and do what they called the designation workshop. And that was in those days, you spent 5 weeks with Kristen. Now it's 3 weeks and 3 weeks divided over 2 years. But then it was one 5 week period where you would go and she would put us through our paces and she would be teaching us things, but we'd also have to teach in front of her
Uh,
and you know
was that in
uh,
Scotland? Was that up in the? Was that up in the
when she
Orkney,
when she
or would she
when
come
she
over?
yeah, when she came out, when she built her center in Orkney, it started being there. I was designated 20 years ago, so it was before she had Orkney.
Mm.
So she would just find retreat centers,
Mm.
and ours was in the Adirondack Mountains in New York. And we had a wonderful group of people. But I remember and we would also work on Shakespeare and she'd work with us. And so I learned an awful lot about most of what I primarily rely on when I work with actors as a coach, either a vocal coach or a text coach, is what I learned from Kristen.
Yeah.
And things that I saw her do and also experienced her doing with me. But I remember one day she said to all of us, she said, "Look, you have to show up as yourself
Uh,
in the room,
yeah.
or you have no right to ask anyone else to show up
Yeah.
as
Wonderful. Wow.
themselves."
Yeah.
And so it was really, she was adamant about, you know, you've got to come in with the energy. You've got to come in and you've got to be willing to be vulnerable and present
Yeah.
and grounded and sent all those things you're asking them to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can't just come in and pronounce from on high.
Yeah.
So that was, I think that was the real challenge. I think it's like, oh, I don't know. I mean, this is not an exact analogy, but a therapist has to have therapy before they can become a therapist,
Yeah.
right? They have to examine themselves in
Yes.
order to be able to um, be present for
Yeah.
their clients. And I tell you, the voice work, it's the voice is a psychophysical instrument,
Yeah.
and you come face to face with yourself and um, your habits of self-use that might be protective or might be masking you or might be shielding you. And it's not that you have to, be vulnerable all the time,
Yeah.
but you have to have the skill of allowing your vulnerability to be right. You have to be able to be unguarded,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, which is,
Yeah.
so, um,
And I think that was something that was very powerful for me in the weekends that we worked together. That there was a vulnerability, and maybe that you're already talking a little bit about it. That link between the emotion and the voice, and because I think especially in the work that we did, the individual work, both in the introduction course, and especially I think in the course for the advanced participants where they brought their text, that people were affected by the work. Something softened, something let go, and there was this emotion. But if I could use the word healthy emotion, there was a healthy, and it was really linked to I could see or feel the link to the work that you did with vocally with the voice, and also when people worked on their text. And so, yeah, maybe can you expand maybe a little bit on that, because I don't know the Linklater work really at all. This is the first time really done any of it with you, but this link between, it's not. I think you mentioned it in the beginning of the course. It's not. We're not going to do a course where we're going to go ma mo. Although I love the ma, they can work. They're very useful as well. Ma mo me and all these things. It wasn't going to be a technical skills based workshop. Although that's important for us as performers. And I think it's great when you shared about the discipline and the rigor of our work, because personally I working I'm sounding like an old man now, but working with the younger students, so many of them, they don't get it anymore. They don't get that rigor. It's like, oh well, okay. And your teacher telling you go away, and then they'll know if you don't have it.
Yeah. No,
yeah.
It because it looks like, I mean, you can see with an athlete, you can see if they're making their free throws and they're missing them, you can see they're not practicing. But actors, I think one of the tough things for actors is they can sort of get away with it.
That's true. I
But
agree
what
with
I
you.
say to my students is, you can go out there and not have done a warm up. You can go out there and not have really worked very hard on this, but you'll never know how good you could have been.
That's brilliant
Which
advice.
is sort of a Machiavellian thing to say, right? But
No,
but
but
you'll
yeah,
never know,
yeah,
because I know when the thing about the Linklater work is it's called freeing the natural voice. And people write long dissertations on, well, what is the natural voice really? But what she's talking about is the voice that we are, the human voice, this extraordinary instrument that most people are born um, uh, with the capacity. Most people are born with a 2 to 3 octave range that is capable of expressing whatever intellectual, emotional, thought, feeling, the impulse that they have. Most of us have this, we're born with this incredible, flexible voice.
yeah,
And then what Kristen used to say is, we are born limitless and we are acculturated into being smaller.
yeah.
And that, and Moshe Feldenkrais talks about this
Well,
too,
yeah,
right?
I
He
was
talks
just
about how we're born sort of following our own impulses,
yeah,
and then we start to try to please our caregivers, and we stop listening to our own impulses, and we start molding our behavior in a way
yeah,
according to what we think is, I mean, it's all about survival, but according to what people around us think rather than what we think.
yeah,
And the same thing, with the voice, I mean, we're heavily influenced by the people around us. We're influenced by our peer groups. We're influenced by our churches, our schools, our religious organizations. We're influenced by, um, but we're also influenced, by the culture of the family. I mean, some students say, "Oh my God, I couldn't get, I was the youngest, I couldn't get a word in edgewise."
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Other people say, "Oh, I was the youngest and everybody was always telling me to be quiet because the whole house was, everybody was it was a very subdued household. And I was always running
yeah,
around, jumping up and down and screaming, yelling. And I kept getting the message, tone down,
yeah, yeah.
right?" So people get all these messages about what they should be doing with their voices. Like little children will start shrieking,
Yeah,
right? And it's their voices can go so high.
yeah,
The message they get is, "Oh, please don't make that awful noise."
yeah.
And then they have to go to acting school to learn to get that part of their voice back.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so when we talk about freeing the natural voice, what we're talking about is removing the blocks,
The blocks, yeah.
removing these,
These
or
patterns, these
these,
habits, yeah,
yeah, these habits of self-use.
yeah,
Um, what I would say, what I've learned to call managing, right? That we get these habits of tightening or the breath getting shallow, or we have these habits of self-use that make us smaller, that make us acceptable, that for instance, um, uh, if you got scolded when you were young or you grew up in a family where it was not okay to have a temper or to get angry,
yeah,
then, little children, they don't have a lot of resources and they don't have a lot of filters. So the most expedient way to not get angry when the impulse comes up is to tighten the
yeah,
body.
yeah, yeah.
Because you can't, they don't have the experience to go, okay, let me figure out how to approach this or have a different perspective. Whatever the thing is that we have a lot more resources when we're adults to sort of rationalize and manage our feelings. But when
Mm,
you're a kid, boom. So
yeah,
there's this, right? So then maybe the back of the tongue tightens and the belly tightens and the breath gets shallow. Well, then that pattern gets put into place. And then years later, you want to be an actor and you walk in and you're doing a scene and your throat is tightening up and you can't get your voice out.
yeah,
You
yeah,
don't know why. I
yeah,
don't know. I should be able to get angry. But
yeah,
this wiring,
yeah,
this extremely compelling wiring is saying, oh no,
yeah,
right? And so, again, this is a place where the Linklater and the Feldenkrais intersect because Christian would say, there's something that wants to come out and there's something that's trying to keep it in,
yeah,
and they're fighting each other, right? They're and motive Moshe Feldenkrais would say cross motivation, right? There's cross motivation happening here. You want to express something and something else is wanting you to not express it. So we learn as actors, we have these voice exercises and lessons that are designed to be able to identify these limiting patterns
yeah,
and remove them and feel what it's like, experience what it's like to speak without that limiting pattern.
yeah,
But then also, once the voice is free, to strengthen it, to get the range back. Like
mm,
most human beings speak in a pretty small range
yeah,
because that's all they need to do.
yeah,
Their
yeah,
world does not require more. Actors really need much more range. So we exercise and expand their range and strengthen it. Then we have to teach them strength and endurance and healthy vocal use so that they can do a
yeah,
3 hour play 8 times a week or a 12-hour shooting day
yeah,
if they're on a film set or a TV set. Um, uh, and so it's not just, oh, let's, free your voice. It's we
Yeah,
free it, but we also have to train it
yeah,
so that it will serve you, and so that you then can begin to skillfully make choices about, okay, in this scene, this character is really taking the lid off and they're in a rage, right? King Lear out on the heath.
yeah,
Blow winds and crack your cheeks. We need to be able to take the lid off. We also need to be able to play a scene where the actor is kind of, has got a pretty good handle on the situation. So there's the anger's coming up, but they're not really revealing it that much. So that the actor begins to be able to have, I'm doing the needle, right? They begin to be able to have degrees.
yes,
And
yes.
that's skill, that's
Oh, that's
craft,
skill. That's
right?
crap. That is.
It's still connected to the truth of the moment,
Mm.
right? We're not acting as if we're angry. We're right. Well, actually, that's Stanislavski talks about the magic as if. We're One of my teachers said acting is behaving truthfully in imaginary circumstances,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So, but so then I learn, oh, instead of my, if my character is in a rage or is angry or is losing their temper, to whatever degree their anger, however um, big or small the the moment of anger is, that I don't have to hold my breath and tighten my tongue to manage the anger. I can now go, okay, in this moment, they're going to reveal this much of it.
mm.
And I can still do it with an open throat and an open connection. So
Yeah,
I'm not hurting myself,
yeah, yeah,
right? Because actors lose their voices mostly in big emotional moments where they're
connect.
tightening up and
Yeah,
they're not getting the breath,
yeah. The connection's not there. Yeah, yeah,
right? And
yeah,
when we talk about connection, we mean the breath, getting the breath that is needed to have
yeah.
that emotional moment, that
Yeah.
intellectual emotional moment.
But that, I mean, that was a huge part of your work. I mean, you talked
Yeah,
about it every session, the breath and the importance of the
fundamental.
breath. You know,
Yeah,
the connection that we have is through Moshe Feldenkrais. That
right.
we kind of both know his work. But
Yeah.
it's so interesting for me this because I mean, in a way, for the actors that are watching this and the performers, student performers, and also people that are in the profession, actors that we work with in the community, you're talking a lot about really essential things in the work, and it's not and for me, I remember speaking to the Japanese. I think I shared with you before. Yoshi Bonnie and I did some. We went and worked with Yoshi Ueda, the Japanese actor, years ago in Holland, and he'd worked with Feldenkrais because Feldenkrais had come to work with Peter Brook in Paris for I think about a month, and Yoshi said that the greatest gift an actor can have is to have a Feldenkrais lesson every week. And it's kind of interesting because what you're talking about there, this whole thing about child. I go into my group and the actors, and already they have the vulnerability of being young actors and that competitiveness. But then you're bringing this whole idea in about childhood and what we carry from there, that we all carry from there. And then, and if you're an actor, you're going to play a certain part, but your sternum just can't move, or your
Yeah.
sternum is holding, and so I guess, yeah, is it a good idea to have a Feldenkrais class every day for an actor? I
Well,
think it is,
listen, when when I'm when I'm working on a show, I'm doing my voice work in my Feldenkrais
Yeah,
daily, and I spend on it when I'm actually performing, I do about an hour and a half
yeah,
of, and I allow myself about an hour and a half. I prefer to do an hour. Sometimes I only get an hour, but because I'd like to be able to do a Feldenkrais lesson and then do my voice warm up depending on what I need that day or what the show demands. You know, some shows demand different things, different shows demand different things. Um, but because I like the thing about the thing I find about the Feldenkrais work is that it brings me home
Yeah, that's
myself.
yeah.
One of the things that frustrates me about Feldenkrais is I cannot find a simple way to encapsulate it.
No, I
So
mean that's I
it does
know.
this. Um, uh, Hamlet says to his mother in the closet scene in Hamlet, Hamlet says to Gertrude, "Let me wring your heart, if it be made of penetrable stuff." And I think what we want as actors is to be made of penetrable stuff. We want, when we talk about vulnerability, what we mean is the ability to be affected and respond
Yeah,
from that unguarded, uh, softer, maybe,
yeah, yeah,
but that more that again we talk about children and how unguarded they are, and when they
yeah,
see something that amazes them, they're just
yeah, yeah,
all
yeah,
play, you know, and when something terrible happens, like their ice cream drops, they're just all tragedy, you
yeah,
know.
yeah.
They're
No, it's right. The drama of
so that we are designed to feel things, and we're also designed to pick up each other's feelings.
yes,
And as an actor, we're always responding to an imaginary circumstance, but we're responding to each other.
yeah,
And if the thing that the voice work and the Feldenkrais work make actors much more skillful listeners.
yeah. Well, you're
And
looking. Yeah, that's
right. And you saw
that's
that in the workshop. And that was one of the things that was so beautiful about the work that everybody was doing was you could feel that the other people in the room were experiencing.
yeah, that's true.
Whoever was working, the others were experiencing it.
They
And
were.
if we were doing a play, you know, when you're an actor and things are really hitting you, you have that much more to respond. The voice works because there is a need or desire to communicate.
Yeah,
The more you can be acted upon, it's not, oh, well, I'm saying this line because it's my next line. It's, I am moved to respond
yes,
because I have allowed myself to receive and be affected by what you just
yeah, yeah.
did. Does that make
It
sense?
does completely,
Yeah.
and it really does, and I think it, and in a way, it's going back to how we are with how we are as teachers, and how, you know what you were saying earlier about you have to be there, and I think it's you have to be there with your students, or you have to be there with your actors, and it's going back to that sense of empathy, and I think trust, and I think the big thing is safety. I think one of the things that we all felt safe, and it's not an easy thing to feel safe in this crazy world, and especially for performers. You know, I've found certainly over here, and I'm sure you've encountered this as well, that there's been a lot of ways of teaching and directing that is kind of done with an obedience. The students have to be obedient to the teacher, and the teacher kind of is this big person up here who's saying this is the way, and I see a lot of fear and
Yeah.
anxiety in young actors and in students to be right or to be correct because I was told this was the right way by this person, you know. And I think in some, although the two characters, you know, Linklater and Feldenkrais, sometimes certainly Feldenkrais, when you watch him teach it, he was pretty tough.
Yeah.
But you know, it's fine. But as long as there's a sense that there's a sense that I'm safe in this place to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
and I can be
Yeah.
open, and I've got someone here who's there with me. It's not like you're body coddling or this, but that openness and that vulnerability is a kind of shared experience in a rehearsal space and in a classroom.
It is. And it's true that both, what I've seen of Moshe on tape and certainly Kristen could be very, you know, could be very what, she would say things like, "Well, are you would you like to do something more interesting than that? We've already seen that. Aren't
Yeah,
you tired of being boring?" But on the other hand, she would get fascinated. And the only reason she would say things like that, I felt, was because she could see that there was more that this person was capable of.
yeah,
And that's what she was after. And I think with Moshe, he talked about potential. He was interested in the potential of the people being able to find and live in up to their potential.
yeah,
Um, I'm not after flexible bodies, I'm after flexible minds. And what I see this work does, I mean, physiologically, we have so much neuroscience now available to the layperson, because it's all exploded in the last 20
yeah,
years. All these things that Kristen and Moshe and all these other teachers, Alexandra, all these things they were doing, there's now science. We can now take pictures of the brain and
yeah,
actually see, yes, this is actually changing the brain. Um, is that I find that Feldenkrais lessons are innately grounding and centering. That the body finds more skeletal support, feels more grounded, feels more centered, and feels more able, right? Whether the person consciously realizes or not, there is a sense of, oh, for me, it's a sense of, oh, I can handle this. Oh,
yeah,
I can handle this. I've got my balance. I'm feeling grounded. I'm feeling centered. I'm feeling a capacity for action. I feel capable. And all of that immediately makes me more confident in the world. And it makes me feel safer because I immediately feel, oh, I can handle this. Do you
yeah,
know?
yes,
And,
yes,
and then with a voice, because the voice is one of the best. So we have this thing called the polyvagal system that again is very, very much in. There's a lot being written about it that's available to the lay person. But the vagus nerve, which is this incredibly long nerve, goes through the vocal folds. And
yeah,
one of the healthiest things you can do for the polyvagal system is to vocalize.
mm.
And one of the things this polyvagal pathway, one of the things it does for us is it tells us if we're safe.
Yeah,
So, so all the voice things that we do are also grounding and centering the
yeah.
human being,
It's
and
yeah,
so
no,
when
it's
you talk
fantastic.
about, you can say to an actor, well, you need to be vulnerable, you need to be
Yeah,
safe, and there's no earthly reason they should think you're right.
yeah.
So if you can give them the experience, Feldenkrais gives, because I had teachers, I would have teachers who would say, get your shoulders down. Why can't you relax your shoulders? And it wasn't until I started doing the Feldenkrais training, I was real like this all the time. And
Yeah.
it wasn't until I did the Feldenkrais training that, I mean, my shoulders in my, middle age are
We're much healthier in
lower
our
than
middle age.
they've ever been.
I keep telling everyone that. I say I'm a better football player.
It
It's
gets
interesting.
it gets the interference out of the system.
It does.
It
It does.
it removes the blocks to your inherent,
Yeah.
capacity. The more it becomes the new normal.
I also love when you talk, because you're also talking, taking it out with the world of theatre and acting. It's actually about us as healthy human beings.
Yeah.
You won't just be a better actor, a better performer, which is great if it's the profession you've chosen, but you will be a healthier human being
Right.
if you make sound, if you use the voice. It's get out there and walk and breathe and
Yeah. It's the things we're designed to do,
yeah,
you know? And
yeah,
then I mean, because a lot of actors, they feel anxiety or they feel stage fright or they're fearful or they're, well, some of that fear is, Moshe, one of the things Moshe said was every emotion, every thought, every feeling has a body pattern,
uh,
right? So if I'm in so I can change, if I'm in a body pattern of fear, I can change my perception of the circumstances and maybe become less fearful. I can also change that body pattern
yeah.
and become less fearful, which
It's
is part
really,
of what
yeah,
the body language people are like, strike a confident pose, right?
yeah,
There's a little something to that. I think it's a bit superficial and there, you can go much deeper with it. But the Feldenkrais really, it really does give you that experience of, oh, actually I'm balanced, right?
yeah,
So then some of the anxiety might be the body, like if I'm pulling my stomach, if I'm contracting my stomach in such a way that my diaphragm can't really move, so I can't really get the breath. If my diaphragm can't really move, my lungs can't really find their full capacity,
yeah,
can't really get the breath, right? Then I'm going to feel anxious.
yeah,
My body's going, well, we can't really get the
yeah,
breath. This is not optimal, right? So if I'm in a situation where I'm actually taking support from the surface I'm on and I'm allowing, my muscles to do only what they need to do, I'm going to immediately feel less anxious.
yeah, yeah.
Not because
No,
the
I mean, yeah,
situation changed, but me in relation to the environment has
yeah.
changed. And
It's in,
Feldenkrais will do that for you.
that's right. Yeah,
It's
no, I mean,
magic.
it's so complex. It's funny because I'm coming right back to at the very beginning. You were talking, if we going into specifically about acting and talk, is when you talked about how can we find that marriage between the, if we call it the method or the kind of more American emotional kind of acting or the classical acting or the kind of British. Because it reminded me, in fact, when I was having the chat with Adrian, because he talked about Olivier, and Olivier famously got stage fright for like about 2 years. And he would say to the actors when we're on stage, please don't look me in the eye or I just can't go on. And they were talking about when he did Othello, he was playing Othello in the Old Vic, and Adrian remember he saw it as a young man, and he remembers every time when Olivier was speaking, his because he was barefoot, his toes were doing funny things, and he obviously that was a kind of anxious something was
Yeah.
happening, and so but here's this actor that is kind of considered the great actor of the kind of theatre 20th century. But then you think about it, think, well, he must have had a lot of fear inside him, and he probably did. He probably did need some further Christ.
Yeah.
He could have been a better actor. And so this it's a real, and I sometimes say that I tell the story of Olivier sometimes to the students because this whole thing often as actors we have this front, and you did it, you were saying, this confidence and to put on the it's some of the so-called great actors, they did that, but inside they were like full of fear, and when that fear and anxiety becomes just too much, the body just goes, no, I can't do it anymore, I
Yeah.
can't act anymore. But you're
Yeah.
but you're Solari, you're the great, don't look me in the eye.
Well, I mean, and the other thing is that we're constantly changing. Our lives are, we're constantly being faced with different circumstances in our lives
Yeah,
and I mean, life is always throwing us off balance,
yeah, yeah.
right? And we have to have strategies to get back into the kind of, and theater, drama, the stories are all about
All
people
of
thrown off balance, right? But an actor has to be more balanced than their character.
great.
They have to be healthier than their character. They always have to know more than their character, and they always have to be way more relaxed than their character, right? Actors will say to me, "Well, wait a minute." I'll say, "Okay, we're going to go into loosening the jaw." And they'll go, "Well, what if your character has a tight jaw?" There's always somebody who wants to know. It's like, well, then you pretend.
Yeah, yeah,
You pretend.
yeah,
This
yeah,
is pretending. It's not really the ninth century. This isn't really Denmark, and
yeah,
you're not really a prince.
yeah,
You know, and we
yeah,
all know that. That the sword
yeah,
fight, he's gonna die. It's pretend.
yeah,
So if there's something like that, like I'm not gonna be able to act with my jaw tight.
yeah.
That's completely counterproductive. So what are the things I can do, and why? Why would you want to, unless it's the movies, I mean, in film, it's people, you see the tight jaw thing all the time. It's like, just do it for the close up. Just do that
Yeah,
little
yeah, yeah,
in the jaw that the hero has. But, this thing about you find some behavior that of tension, but just know that any kind of deliberate tension that you bring on stage, you're gonna have to find a way to deal with that
yeah,
outside of the, like, I mean, an extreme example is an actor playing Richard III or playing the Elephant Man or playing somebody else that's got a body shape that they have to hold in performance. You
yeah.
better have a massage therapist and a Feldenkrais
Well, yeah,
practitioner in your contract,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I mean,
that is going to bring you back into balance. I've found that my work, it just, when I, so I'm going to circle back to, I trained as a Linklater teacher, and I designated in 2003, and I then immediately got a Broadway national tour. So I didn't teach for 2.5 years, 3 years. But when I went back to teaching, I kept thinking, okay, but there's something missing. And
yeah,
some of my colleagues did a lot of Alexander technique,
yeah,
and I think the Alexander technique is terrific, but I always felt that it was practitioner dependent for me. You had to have somebody there with their hands on you.
yeah,
And what I loved about the Feldenkrais was you could do an awareness through movement lesson, and you didn't need the teacher, because you're essentially, as Moshe says, you're correcting yourself. You're
yeah,
being guided through the
yeah,
lesson, but you're correcting yourself. So I thought, well, maybe it's time to train as a Feldenkrais, get a Feldenkrais training. And at that point, there were training programs all over.
yeah.
And so I did the New York training program. I was in the New York 3 cohort, I guess. Was it 3 or was it, anyway, I can't remember. Or was it 6? I can't remember. I was in one of those New York cohorts. And I started in 2007. So that was a while ago, but is we the program finished in 2011, and I also had the great good fortune to connect with Arlene Zones, who's a Feldenkrais practitioner and trainer, who had started putting lessons together in a workshop for the function of voice. And she had met Kristen Linklater when years ago, when Kristen came to California and Arlene was uh, living in San Francisco, being an actor. And she loved the Linklater voice work. So she was doing her version of the Linklater voice work, and then all these wonderful Feldenkrais lessons. And so she took a huge chance and asked me to come and teach with her,
Yeah.
and to come in and do actual Linklater voice lessons, so that people could do the Feldenkrais and then feel, oh, what is that doing for my voice?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah,
And by the way, the Linklater work also is going to help them improve their voices. Knowing that I had a Feldenkrais lens as well, because it was very unusual to bring someone who was not a Feldenkrais person into a Feldenkrais training.
yeah, yeah,
I mean, I was a Feldenkrais person, but I was coming in as a Linklater teacher, right?
yeah, yeah,
Very unusual to do that. And we started in San Diego, in training in San Diego. And And the fascinating thing is we recorded it. We made a DVD,
Yeah,
uh, which we have a public version and a version for Feldenkrais practitioners. And you said you have that, right?
yeah,
If you
yeah.
watch it, if you
Yeah,
watch it, you can see because I was doing the lessons. I was doing the lessons and then I would do the voice work. My teaching changes over the course of that.
yeah,
Like to me, to me it's remarkable how
yeah,
my teaching changes from doing, however many 3 or 4 hours, 3 hours of Feldenkrais
yeah,
and an hour of Linklater, plus whatever I was doing to prepare in the morning before I went in to
yeah,
teach. And so I think remarkable changes are possible, and what the actor gets from the Feldenkrais and the Linklater, and indeed so many other movement trainings. I think I gotta say, I think the best thing an actor can do is get as many kinds of movement training as they can.
yeah. I agree. And then
Right.
and people will find, you know, there's some things that just like, for you, Linklater and Feldenkrais is the one that other people might find as something else, as something.
Yeah.
The final
But
thing, the thing that was really, really there in the work, and it's going back to when you talked about the child. I think it's so important in in acting and in teaching is that sense of playfulness.
yeah.
There was, and there was such playfulness in the class and playfulness in the exercises, if we call them exercises, or some of the things that we're doing was it just made us feel good and playful. And I think, and I think that is such a beautiful and necessary thing that we need. And again, we sometimes forget as actors, we're in a serious
Yeah.
business, and this sense of play. And I think, I think when you come back, I think we can really when you come back when you I keep forgetting you were in New York when you were doing it. You were here with us because it really felt like you were there. So for the next workshop, not just we can continue the work with voice, but I think also taking it into acting and into performing. And that link, we already started to do it in the advanced work, but I think there's really a lot of room to continue.
There really is. I think the other thing I've found, so most of my Feldenkrais is in that I teach is in the form of awareness through movement lessons
Yeah,
in the classroom where I teach the voice work. But I mean, I would say that I teach acting through the lens of voice and Feldenkrais. What was I going to say? This is what you just said. Oh, the sense of play that Moshe said, and he's not the only one who has said that playfulness, that that playful curiosity is the most fertile place to learn from. It is the most fertile state of being for learning. And um, one of my favorite teachers, she said, when you're acting, you've always got to have a twinkle in the eye, right? That there's always a twinkle in the eye, that the audience knows they're in good hands and they know that you're in control of it,
yeah,
that you're going someplace that you can't get out of. So that playfulness, that again, that the animals learn
yeah.
through play. Human animals learn through play, children learn through play. We learn so much through play. And also if when we're sort of relaxed and having fun, it's much easier for us to
That's right. Yeah,
and then you start to see, oh, the same place I'm laughing from, that's the place that my character could weep from.
yeah,
That's the place my character could rage from. That place of openness, that place of play. Because for an actor, you know, to do a huge a big vocal scene or a big emotional scene, and come off stage, it's like playing a match. Wow,
Yes, it is.
that was
Wow,
amazing,
yeah, no,
right?
no, it's true. I mean, it's like it's going back
Uh,
to what you said, in the beginning, how you love the feeling of the team and the teamwork, and I think that really is it. That when we're in with a group of people, and it is, it is a team profession in essence. Unless you're doing a solo play, but then you've still got all your team around you,
yeah.
and that sense of being together, like listening to that football match. I was laughing when you were saying about back in the day in the Globe they would be involved. I sometimes think, wow, maybe because in the football match they're shouting out, "You're rubbish!" or "Come on!" can you can you imagine that in the theatre? Speak up! I can't hear you. But that kind of, but that sense of play, that we're playing something, that if we're enjoying it, then I think the audience are going to enjoy it. And even in the work, the work that we did when you had us like calling out these kind of funny, crazy Italian names, and it just gets us, and we're
Yeah.
laughing, and it's something. So it really is a beautiful thing. And
Yeah.
I think it's something that we should, more, not just actors should do it. We should all do it and have time to be with our voice
And
and be playful
yeah.
and be in a space with people that are,
Yeah.
because we are becoming more and more disconnected,
Yeah.
that we
Well,
can,
I think that's part of why people go to football matches, right? I mean, part
yeah,
of why people love sporting events is, I think, is that sense of the energy of the crowd, and and we spark off each other, you
we
know?
do, we do.
And the other thing about the voice is that because sound, I mean, when we see things, it's about, right, it's about light, it's about receiving light and
Mm.
the images. But when we hear things, sound physically moves through space. My voice physically moves through space and goes into another body and sets up a vibration, right?
Well,
It's
yeah,
like it's like if you have two tuning forks and you strike one, the other one will vibrate. And that's the actor audience relationship. That is it.
yes, that's true.
Your voice is setting up a sympathetic vibration in the audience,
Beautiful.
and
Yeah,
they are literally being affected.
yeah, yeah.
They are having an experience, and you can tell. One of the things I love about working with the voice is you can feel and you can see in the room that people can feel that they have been rearranged.
Yeah, yeah,
They can feel. They
yeah.
can feel that their breath has changed. They can feel. We stop watching and we start experiencing.
Yes, and
Right?
it's
We
a
stop
great
watching a
feeling.
performance and we start experiencing it. It
Yeah,
is.
that's the
And I
thing. It's a
think,
feeling that is wow. I mean, I
yes.
felt that after every session when people walked out, they walked out differently. They
Yeah.
came in, and then they left with a different feeling, a different sensation, a different way of walking because of that shared experience.
And we get to feel ourselves. We get to feel maybe more of who we are than we allow in ordinary day-to-day existence.
Yeah, it's
You
true. The
know?
experience, the shared experience.
Yeah.
Last night at the football match, of course, because there's a winner and loser. So at the end, there was 25,000 at one end singing together, "You'll Never Walk Alone." It was quite amazing to hear it. These voices singing in unison, and they probably could never sing as high as they were singing normally, but because they were
Yeah.
singing together, and of course the other 25,000 were like walking out head down, emotionally distraught. So it's kind of interesting how these these events and when we're together can affect. But no, here's to the voice, and here's to continuing our work together. I really thank you so much for having the time for this conversation
Oh, it's a pleasure.
and to
All right. My pleasure. My pleasure. It really, it's been such a delight. It was such a delight working with all the participants who came.